Good morning. Today is the 14th day of Kislev, the 27th of November. We're up to the second reading of Vayishlach, the story of Jacob's return back to the land of Canaan to his father. And on his way back, he has to cross a stream called Yabuk. This is actually a place that we know today. We know exactly where it is. And there's even a little island there called Machanaim. In any case, it's one of the tributaries of the Jordan. And it says like this: that night he arose, took his 2 wives, his 2 handmaids, his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Yabuk river. He took them and carried them across the stream, and then carried all his possessions across the stream in the same way. Jacob remained on his own. He was alone. And a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn, until the coming of dawn. When this man saw that he could not overcome him, he touched Jacob's hip joint, so that Jacob's hip joint became dislocated as he wrestled with him. This man said to him, "Let me leave, for dawn is breaking." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you leave unless you first bless me." And he asked him, "What is your name?" And he answered, "Jacob." He then said, "No longer shall it be said that your name is Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with me, with God and with men, and you have prevailed." Jacob inquired and said, "Please tell me your name." He replied, "Why do you ask what my name is?" So he blessed Jacob there. That's the end of the reading. What is this all about? Well, the way it's usually understood is that this was a type of a spiritual struggle where Jacob encounters what's usually described as Esau's archangel, his heavenly force, let's call it, the heavenly force behind him. But apart from that, this is a much more general story. And I want to focus on the main verse here, which is that Jacob remained alone, and a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. It's actually, if you know Jewish songs, so Shlomo Carlebach made a very famous tune to this. A lot of people sing this verse. And this verse really has 3 parts to it. Jacob remained alone, a man struggled with him, and finally, until the break of dawn. The way that this is understood, and now we're tackling a topic that I don't believe we've ever talked about, but which Rav Ginsburg has written 2 books on. One of them I had the good fortune to edit, was the first book that I edited for him. And then another book was written a few years later on the same topic. The book is called Natural Consciousness. And this is a topic that a lot of people are not aware of and don't realize. A lot of times we say that what the Baal Shem Tov taught us is teachings that give us a taste of the future that will come. And by the future we mean the redemption, but even more than that, even things that come after the redemption. And what is this all about? The history of mankind really divides into 3 stages. And this is based on the sages saying that our reality will exist for 6,000 years. 2,000 are called chaos, 2,000 are called Torah, and 2,000 are called the times of Mashiach. So a lot of times when people talk about the Messiah, this idea that the Messiah was once or then or here or then, there's a very simple statement in the sages, it's repeated twice in the Talmud, that the time of Messiah is 2,000 years, from the year 4,000 all the way to the year 6,000. It's sometimes explained as these are years that have the potential of us seeing the Messiah, but it also is understood many times as all 2,000 years are years of the Messiah. So let's explain this. The 2,000 of chaos come directly after Adam and Eve are banished from the Garden of Eden. What does it mean that they were banished from the Garden of Eden? If you've been following the morning classes, so in the morning classes we've been talking about this, that the Garden of Eden is an enchanted state. It's a word that I've been borrowing last week from Max Weber, and a very famous sociologist. An enchanted state is basically what we mean, that you have a very clear and present sense of godliness in everything. So we call it enchanted. Enchanted with what? Not with magic, but rather enchanted with godliness. That was a state in the Garden of Eden. When they were banished, their consciousness fell down many levels, so that in principle all of us feel disconnected from, not just from God, but also from each other and from nature. It was a fall in the sense of consciousness falling down into a state of being, and this is the first part of our verse here, Jacob remained alone. That you feel alone, you feel solitary. You feel that there's no connection anywhere. You're detached. We know that this already began to fracture already in the Garden of Eden when Adam said, it's Eve's fault that we ate from it. Already a loss of connection between them. But then when they came out of the Garden of Eden, it says that for 130 years they weren't together. Until finally they were again together, and then they had Seth, their third child. But the first 2,000 years, which we call 2,000 years of chaos, are a state of every person feels separate from everything else. Consciousness is fractured. If there was ever consciousness that was unified in Adam, now during these 2,000 years, it's completely deteriorated to a state in which every person feels alone in the world. The beginning of the change was with Abraham. And the middle 2,000 years, called the 2,000 years of Torah, they're the time of a struggle. And it's very interesting how to read this part of the verse. It says, and a man struggled with him. There are two ways to understand a man struggled with him. It could be that it's a struggle against this man, meaning he struggled with him, against him. But it could also mean that the man here who's struggling against me is not actually a man, and he's not against me. He's struggling with me. And who is this? This is God. And so we call this the 2,000 years of Torah, meaning, in other words, that there became a consciousness that we have a role in the world. It wasn't just being alone here. We have a connection. First of all, a connection with God. And God is struggling with me to help me, as it were. To feel that there's always somebody with me, I'm not alone. And there's something to struggle for. The struggle against evil. The struggle against being alone. The struggle against immorality. All these struggles, they're the struggles of, and Jacob struggled with him. And this man struggled with Jacob. So it could be, again, against this man. This man would then be, like we said, Esau's archangel. In other words, representing each one of our individual evil inclinations, the negative side of our personality that we need to overcome, that we need to struggle against. And it could also be that there's finally a bond formed with that which is beyond, with God. And that's why in the Talmud it's called the 2,000 years of Torah, because this bond was created the moment that God came down on Mount Sinai. We've mentioned in the past that the sages say that before God came down on Mount Sinai, there was a disconnect between the spiritual realm and the physical realm. That was another one of the reasons why people felt alone. There was nobody with me. I was always alone, even spiritually. There was no one to talk to. Everything was nature. It was not me. It was not connected to me. But from the year 2000 and on, there begins to be, let's call it, a joining of forces between man and God, as it were, to struggle through life, to make it through life, to be able to do good and to conquer evil. But this is still a state in which a person feels that God is something else, meaning God is helping me. Even if we understand He's struggling with me, side by side, but He's helping me. It's a very interesting concept, that God is my helper. That in and of itself you have to wrap your head around. What exactly does that mean? But then comes the third stage. The third stage is daybreak. And daybreak represents a new mode of consciousness where the struggle is gone. There's no more struggle, but rather even Esau's archangel makes peace with me. He says, he surrenders, and he says, let me go, for a day is broken. What do I need to do? The sages said he needed to go and sing the praises of God. What does this mean? This is what we call sweetening in the Baal Shem Tov's terminology. Sweetening means that even these things that I had to struggle against, the negative inside of me, they finally find their place. And their place is to praise God also. They also have part of that. But the interesting thing is that when daybreak comes, and you ask, what is your name? Who are you? Jacob asks him, what's your name? He says, why would you ask me my name? In other words, I don't have a separate name. It's also the person looking at himself. He doesn't feel anymore that God is helping him. He's feeling now that he and God are one thing. These three states, and again, there's 2 whole books dedicated to understanding these concepts. They're called self-consciousness, which is the consciousness of being separate and being alone. And Jacob was alone, found himself alone, he remained alone. That's self-consciousness, when all there is me, and everything else is separate. Everything else is a distant creation that I have no relationship with. The second stage is called divine consciousness, because divine consciousness is exactly what it means. It means that God is with me. First of all, I have consciousness of the divine, and thanks to my consciousness of the divine, I can struggle. I can struggle against the negative. But the third stage is called natural consciousness. And by natural consciousness, this is a phrase that's based a little bit on words spoken in 180 years ago by one of the great Hasidic masters, and he called it in Yiddish, Yiddische Natur, which means Jewish nature. And I'll give in a moment an example, but what it means there is that there's no more separation between what we call God and me, in the sense that the person can't say God is helping me. God is helping me is like saying, he's sort of like putting his hand here and helping me lift something, which I said in and of itself is very difficult philosophically to even justify, to use that type of language. But if the sole reason for existence, or the central reason for existence in the middle stage, called divine consciousness, is the performance of the Torah's commandments, be they the prescriptive commandments or the prohibitive commandments, the struggle of life. In natural consciousness, that is no longer a struggle. It becomes natural. In other words, a person doesn't feel that in order to keep Shabbat, they have to struggle against their nature. They're not struggling against the world. They're not struggling against their need to make a living. They're not struggling against distances that they can't cover if there's no car. It's a completely different reality, a reality in which everything is once again enchanted with godliness. And so it becomes natural to act in the way that the Torah prescribes. In fact, it's said that at that time, there will no longer be a reward for performing the commandments the way there is now. There will be some reward for it, but it's not the same type of reward at all, because there will be no longer a struggle. And so when there's no struggle, the reward obviously goes down. But the point is not that we're looking for the reward. The point is that we're trying to say that the struggle is gone, and it becomes easy, becomes natural, to the point where we're not even commanded anymore. I don't have to command anyone to breathe. God doesn't put in the Torah, you should breathe every 3 seconds and breathe 18 times a minute. There's nothing like that, because nobody needs to command me to breathe. The same type of existence will be a daybreak with reference to everything that the Torah is talking about, including my ability to overcome my evil inclination, including my ability to overcome my separateness from God, from people, and so on. And this is called natural consciousness. So this is just on the edge of the fork, just a first excursion into this very interesting topic of 3 periods of time in human development, which culminate in what we call daybreak, the ascent of natural consciousness in living with God and living with Torah and living with each other also. A different sense of not being separate and understanding one another at a whole new level. So thanks for joining, and I hope to continue tomorrow.